Now we're going to go ahead and cover how to generate an invoice inside of Lawcus. But before I actually have us work on generating an invoice, I just want to cover a couple of things that you want to make sure that you have set up already in order to ensure that your invoice is set up properly. The first thing that you're going to want to do is make sure that you're in settings, and you want to make sure that you have your information inside of the bill settings for the invoice templates. Now here you'll see that I already have a template created for a law office. But we can actually, if you want to create a new one, you would just hit add template, and you would come into here, and if there was a particular color that you wanted to have for your firm, you would go ahead and select the color. If you have custom colors, you do have the option to add hex codes here, and this will allow you to add in the different color that you want for your particular business or brand. You then want to make sure that you choose the kind of invoice theme that you want to go with. There's 3 different options that you can choose from, and it really just changes the flow of what it looks like. Some important things to make sure that you pay attention to is the currency. If you're working with different people in different areas that work with different currencies, you're going to want to make sure that this is checked to the proper currency that you're working with. And the beauty of having multiple templates is you have the ability to have multiple currency types depending on the template. So this one is the United States one, we're going to leave it as that. But if you wanted to have another one, you would just go ahead and select it, and then when you're naming your template up here, you would just make sure that you insert the name of the country somewhere in there so that you're able to differentiate it when you're working on the invoice. Another thing that you want to make sure that you have is the default due date. This is something that comes in very handy when you're working on sending out an invoice, because it will automatically show up when the invoice is due. And another thing as well is when you're working on sending out invoice reminders, if this information is inputted properly with the number of days when it's due, that will then better set up the invoice reminders and how they're sent out. We'll cover invoice reminders in a bit later on. Some other things to make sure that you pay attention to is the bill to information. You want to make sure that all of this, if you want to have it on the invoice or not, you check it off. So if you want to have the matter label on there or not, you have the option to take it off, and you'll see that it goes away up here. And if you didn't want to have the issue date or any of this other stuff, you would just go ahead and select whether you want to check it on or off. That's going to be entirely up to you. Important to pay attention to, though, is going to be the company information. You want to make sure that you have your company logo in here if you have one. And if there's any information here that you don't want on the invoice, you'd make sure that you check it off so that it doesn't show up. If you're not a firm that works with flat fees and you want to take that off the invoice, you do have the ability to do that. And you would just select whichever options you want in terms of what you don't want to have on there. So if we took flat fees off, you'll see automatically that whole entire section just then disappears and it's no longer visible on the invoice. Same thing is going to be for time entries and expenses. If you're a firm that only works with flat fees, you're going to want to make sure that you keep time entries off if you don't really use them. Expenses, the same thing. Other info, this would just be like the subtotal, and it will also be any discounts. So if you are don't really typically give out discounts, you can definitely take that off the invoice. And you can also ensure that you have terms on there. So you have the ability to show the terms or not to show the terms. And speaking of terms, when it comes to them, you have the option to add them in as a default here in the template as well. So if you have particular terms and conditions that you offer, you want to make, or that not that you offer, but that you want to ensure that you communicate to your clients, you're going to add in that information here and any notes. So if you want us to say thank you for your business or anything like that, you have the option to add that here. If you don't want your invoice to show any outstanding invoices that are past due, you do have the option to take it off and it will no longer show up. And the same thing for the trust balance. If you're not a firm that typically uses trust accounts and have trust balances or work with retainers. When it comes to the credit balance, the same thing. If you don't really utilize retainers or take trust payments, and you don't want this on here, you do have the option to take that off as well. When it comes to the payment summary, that's something that typically every invoice should have, but if you don't want to have it, you can take it off. And last but not least, the trust request. This information here, if it's not necessary and you don't need it, you can take this off. So the beautiful thing about these templates is that you can really just customize it as much as you possibly want to. And in addition to that, you can have as many as you want and just name them differently. And here it's important to note that you do have the option to set up an invoice template as a default. So that one, if you're going to be using it on a consistent basis, you have the option to check it on or off here. In order to make sure that the information shows up properly when it comes to the name of the firm and all this information, when you're inside of your settings, you do have the ability to make sure that that information shows up properly under firm settings and company info. And here the company logo was inserted and the address and all of this. In order for the invoice to actually save, you have to make sure that you have a logo, the business name, the address, and the business phone number. These things are essential. If it's not on there, the invoice will not save to any of the matters and you won't be able to even send them out. All right, so now that I have said that, let's go ahead and look at how to generate an invoice. So you can do this by selecting your matter and then going to, actually, I apologize. You can do this by going to invoices. And once you're in invoices, you would then go ahead and select new invoice. And then you would go ahead from here and add in the matter that you want to go ahead and create the invoice for. And once you've done that, you're going to have to go ahead and select add on invoice activity. And that will then generate all of the time entries that we have populated, even the non-billable ones, as you see here, to generate on the invoice, any expenses as well. And you do have the option to check it on or off. And if there were only a specific time frame that you wanted to focus on, you do have the option to come in here and just select a particular period of time. And if you want us to do a custom range, you can even select custom range and you would select the time period that you want to do that for. I'm going to go ahead and just select everything here and just add it to the invoice so we can see what that looks like. A couple of things to point out as well is going to be the invoice options up here at the top. As you see, the main template that I have as a default is the one that's showing up here. I actually have a trust balance for this particular matter, so that information is showing up here. And if you turn it on, it actually takes out the funds from here. And if you don't want to use it, you have the option to check it off. I'm going to go ahead and hit to use the trust balance. And you'll see over here on the right in these options, you do have the option to even customize the invoice as you're working on it to send it out. So anything that you've already populated and saved under invoice templates, you have the option to modify them here on the invoice if it was something specific that you wanted to change as a one-off for this particular matter. When it comes to the options here, you obviously can take off the trust balance, you can take off the operating balance and all of these things here. Important thing to pay attention to is the tax information that's here. So if you're wanting to ensure that your firm takes out taxes, you're going to want to make sure that inside of your settings, you set this up properly. So once you're in bill settings, you're going to want to make sure that you go to tax settings and you have the option here to add in the name and the value of the tax for your particular state. Now, when you're in here, if this wasn't already here, you would just go ahead and hit add new tax, and then you would add in the state. And then if I wanted to make this the primary, I would just go ahead and take this off so that it's no longer checked, and then check off the option that I want to be primary and save it. And then that information will become live on the invoice. All right, so going back into invoices, and you'll see here that the invoice that we were just working on is actually already right here. And then once you're here, you can actually still go in and edit it if you wanted to make any further changes to it. And once we're looking at this, you see that down here, it does show up that the trust balance is being applied here. So then the only thing that is remaining as an outstanding balance is $500 in payment that's being due. So you see here that it actually shows up that they're applying trust. I want to actually take us to processing or going over the trust request. So you do have the ability to do a trust request by selecting trust request while you're inside of the invoices section of Lawcus. And then if it was a different issue date, you can change that here. You can also change the due date. Then you would go in and you would add in the client name and you would add in the matter. And then you would add in the amount, whatever amount that you would want for the trust amount, and then any information that you want to add as a note, and then create. And here it is. This then creates a trust request going to this person. Now, if you wanted to go ahead and right now it's currently in the draft state, if you wanted to go ahead and actually move forward with this and send this out, all you would need to do is go to send by email, and this would send this invoice as a trust request to this client to receive payment. If you had a default email that you wanted to put in, you have the option to select it here, and then you would send this email off and it would send out to that person. Now, if it were an instance where you sent the invoice in another form, maybe you downloaded it and you sent it in another way, and you wanted to just mark the invoice as sent, you have the ability to do that as well. And all you would need to do is select the invoice and then come up here to more actions and then mark it as sent. And you'll see here that this was an invoice that we actually marked as sent. So this was already taken care of. Another thing that we can actually do here is also a credit request. So if there's an instance where we've been issued a credit, we can go ahead and apply that here as well and add in the information for that particular client so that we can go ahead and send that out. And then you would just add in the amount and then create. Now we can go ahead and mark this as sent. And then we can come out of here. One other thing that we can actually do is go ahead and send out invoices in bulk. And in order to do that, we will want to go ahead and select on this and then do bulk actions. And then we can actually send by email and send all these invoices out at one time. We also have the option to mark all the invoices sent here as well, if we wanted to mark all of them as being sent. If there were ever an instance where we wanted to add a payment, let's say we've received a payment in a different form, like a check or something, or maybe they brought in cash, you do have the option to apply a payment for monies received. And then it could be a direct payment, and you can have it go right into the law firm and then put the source as, actually, let me go back, sorry. You would leave it on direct payment, and then you would select the option to either do cash, and you can even do check, and you can even do if it came through as a bank transfer. So I'm going to leave it on cash, and then if there was any notes that you wanted to add to this, you can add it down here and go ahead and hit add.